talk about Notre Dame. Notre Dame and Clemson are set to do battle in the ACC title game. And the question kind of going into this game is kind of the elephant in the room that has existed since about mid-November, and that is, can Notre Dame beat Clemson twice? It's going to be a really tough task for the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Of course, last time when these two teams met, Trevor Lawrence was out due to COVID. So it was very, I mean, not to take anything away from Notre Dame, because we talked about it at the time. I mean, Notre Dame looked good. Notre Dame rose to the occasion. I mean, they still had to go out and play a good game, and they did exactly that. But, there's always going to be that kind of voice in the back of your head that was like, yeah, but Trevor Lawrence wasn't on the field. The best player possibly in the nation at the most important position of the game wasn't on the field for that. And so, how is that going to play into factor this time around? And, I look at it and you know what? I think Notre Dame, it's going to be a very good game. It's going to be a close game. I think this is where Notre Dame is going to kind of show you that, hey, you know what? That game, just because Trevor Lawrence was out doesn't mean that game was a fluke. And I think it is going to be a fun game. It's going to be a good game. It's not going to be kind of the typical Notre Dame primetime laying of an egg that we're typically seeing from Notre Dame. But I do think that Clemson does ultimately win this game. Notre Dame is better than expected this season. And like I said, I mean, Trevor Lawrence was not on the field last time, and as much as, you don't want to take away from the Notre Dame win, because of that, it is still something to talk about, something to make a note of, that this time Trevor Lawrence is available. And I think Clemson knows that, hey, they very well could be playing for their shot in the college football playoff here. Even though it's unlikely that I see them dropping out of the top four, you never know with how things are kind of going, because let's say that Florida beats Alabama, well, then Clemson's probably out, because they're going to have Florida and Clemson in, and then most likely Ohio State, Notre Dame. So Clemson knows that for the first time in a long time, they have to win this game to be in the college football playoff. It's not, a foregone conclusion where, like last year, if they would have lost to Virginia, they probably still were going to be in. Like we know that already. But this year, they're going to play in the ACC championship basically for a right to go to the college football playoff, as long as everything else kind of plays out the way that we think it's going to play out. So it's a big game. I think Notre Dame could rise to the occasion, but I think ultimately Clemson wins.
So what people aren't talking about with this rematch of Notre Dame versus Clemson is, everybody's focused on Trevor Lawrence going to be back, which is a big deal. I'm not going to overshadow that. I'm not going to say that's not a big deal, because that's a huge, huge deal. But the bigger deal is Clemson was without a lot of their top defensive players in that game against Notre Dame as well because of COVID. And those guys will be back. I feel like that is a bigger return for Clemson than even Trevor Lawrence, because they had no answer for stopping Notre Dame's offense in key situations. And I think with those defensive leaders back, and that's going to play a difference. Honestly, I don't believe that this is a play-in game. I'm not going to buy that. I believe both of these teams are in. Notre Dame has done enough this year that win or lose, they're in the playoff. Clemson, it may become a little bit iffier if Notre Dame wins again for Clemson, but I feel like if they're going to get in, they're going to be like the fourth team in. The thing that could hurt them the most, though, hurt both either Notre Dame or Clemson, is, you hit it right on the head, is Florida versus Alabama, the winner of that game. If it's Alabama, great. Clemson and Notre Dame, you're both in. Congratulations. Ohio State, you're in as well. Alabama, you're in. However, if Florida pulls the upset over Alabama, then it becomes a little bit trickier. I think it becomes easier if Clemson loses to Notre Dame in this scenario as well, because then you go, okay, we're leaving a 2-loss Clemson team out. No big deal. You got 2 losses, and we got 1 loss Florida, 1 loss Alabama, undefeated, Ohio State in as well. We're good. It gets dicey if Florida upsets Alabama and Clemson beats Notre Dame. Who's left on the outside looking in, essentially? Because in all things considered, you're not kicking Ohio State, an undefeated Ohio State team, out. You're not going to say, all right, you're undefeated. Sorry about you, Ohio State. I mean, you had one bad game where you still won against a top 10 team and you're still out because
you are right. But I think the one argument you can make against Ohio State, and it's not going to matter, is the fact that they've only played, if they win, out, they'll only have played 7 games. And they'll only be 7-0.
The playoff committee has said they are not going to take that into consideration because this is such a strange year. Teams are playing how they can play. So it does become tricky, and I think it's going to be very entertaining. I kind of hope for it because I don't think there's any way. Well, they may. I don't know. Do you leave Notre Dame out? Because I guess if you're going to leave you got to look at the past situations. Okay, a one-loss Notre Dame team, a non-conference champ. Well, Notre Dame, last time you made the playoff, you got embarrassed. You got laughed off the field, essentially.
By the same quarterback, because Trevor Lawrence was a quarterback 2 years ago.
Right. But I don't know. It's going to be a tough one. It's going to be real tough. And then, of course, there's going to be teams out there like Cincinnati or Coastal Carolina that may have something to say about it as well. I don't think Coastal Carolina's got a shot to get into the playoff. And Cincinnati's just on the outside looking in, but their strength of schedule isn't going to be anywhere close to these other teams we're talking about. But it's going to be interesting. And I kind of want to root for the chaos just because why not? It's 2020. Let's add a little bit more chaos into it.
Oh, I'm always an advocate of the chaos. So yeah, I agree with you. It's not a playing game by definition. It's not the winner is in, the loser is out. But it essentially plays like that, and that kind of goes to what we're, the next part of this conversation was, which is will the losers still make the college football playoff? And my original take is that depends on how bad Notre Dame loses if they lose. Because if they do lose by 2 or 3 touchdowns, then I think you can make the argument that, okay, well, it was clear that because the Clemson was missing all these players the first time, that if Clemson had those players, which I know is kind of unfair to, take those, basically make that argument, but it's a valid argument at the same time that like, hey, Clemson only lost that game because they had a lot of players out. They are the better team. That kind of breaks the tie between the 1-1 record. Clemson's in, Notre Dame, you're out if Alabama or if Florida beats Alabama, because that's the other kind of weird thing, because you are right. Both of them are in if it's a close game, no matter who wins, because there's really not, looking at the rest of the, top of that list. I mean, you've got Florida. I mean, you're not putting them in if they lose the SEC championship game. Texas A&M's not even going to play in the SEC championship game, so you can't make the argument for them. IU lost to Ohio State, so you're not putting them in. So, like, a lot of the
IU's not going to play in the Big Ten championship game.
Right. So you have them, you have a lot of teams that are ranked highly that absolutely have no shot. Like, there's no way they're getting in no matter what. Like, there's no Big 12 team that's up there. There's no Pac-12 team now that Oregon's lost that's up there. They're like, there's 3 conferences that are playing for it right now, the ACC, the Big 10, and the SEC. And right now there's really only one Big 10 team that's up there. So it's not like you're taking, a Northwestern or somebody else in there. So, like, there's not a whole lot you can do besides say, the college football playoff is essentially set. It's going to be Alabama no matter what, the winner of the ACC championship game no matter what, and then, possibly whoever loses the SEC championship game, ACC championship game. Like, it's pretty much already set in stone between, like, a 14 playoff between like 6 teams essentially that are going to be playing for it. So yeah, if it's a close,
I think it's a 14 playoff between 5 teams essentially.
Yeah, like it's long story short, it's down to not a whole lot. Yeah,
it's down to 5 teams essentially right now.
Right. So there's not a whole.
Honestly, I do believe this chaos could happen because I am extremely high on this Florida team. I am extremely high on Kyle Trask. And I think they're being totally overlooked right now because it's Alabama. Why not? It's Alabama. They win it. No question. Really? Have you not watched this Florida team? I mean, talk about weapons.
Yeah, I'm interested.
I would take Kyle Trask or Kyle Pitts, their tight end, any day of the week on a Colts roster. Yeah. Any day of the week. I mean, these guys, this is a good team. Everybody wants to say, well, Mac Jones is playing great quarterback. Well, Jack Plummer could play great quarterback at Alabama with Jalen Waddle and Devonta Smith and Najee Harris. I mean, heck, he puts up okay numbers with just David Bell and Rondale Moore. No, of course, Mac Jones is. I mean, Mac Jones is better than Jack Plummer, obviously. But do not sleep on this Florida Gators team. This is a team that is they're good.
Oh, yeah.
I think this is the best Florida team since Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin, Aaron Hernandez, all of them. I think this is the best Florida team we've seen since then.